Automatic farms are nothing new inside of Minecraft. Ever since the launch of the game, players have always attempted to find the easiest and most efficient way to farm items in the game. With constant updates, new features have allowed players to build greater and easier farms to obtain these items in easy and automatic ways. One of the most infamous farms I'm sure that everyone knows about are iron farms. Iron is obviously one of the most important items to have in survival Minecraft, and it's required for so many things such as iron armor, tools, hoppers, beacon pyramids, anvils, lanterns, and so much more. Now, most of these items don't require too much iron to make, and mining for the iron to make them early game would be relatively easy to do. However, if you are to continue your survival world in late game Minecraft, you're going to need much more iron that you can get from mining. Things such as hoppers and beacon pyramids especially require excessive amounts of iron to construct. Personally, in my survival world, I find that I go through thousands of iron ingots each month, with using stacks of hoppers to make storage areas, as well as stacks of iron blocks to get maxed out beacon effects. Building these farms has been mostly consistent and has stayed the same for many years. However, when comparing these farms to how they used to be built to building them today, there's a drastic difference in the designs and efficiency of the builds. If you're not already, make sure that you're subscribed. I have many more videos like this planned for the future, and subscribing would help the channel out and keep you notified on my latest videos. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. First, let's take a look back at how these iron farms came to be. Iron golems that dropped these farmable iron ingots hadn't always been in the game. Before, when villages were added in beta 1.8, there were no iron golems that spawned and defended the villagers. It was not only until 1.2.1 where villages would finally spawn iron golems if they were populated enough. It's important that we mention about the spawning mechanics for the golems, as it was a key feature on how the farms were made. In this version, one golem would randomly spawn for every 16 villagers. The villagers needed to have doors and roofs over their head for it to technically be considered a village by the game. These farms would be set up for golems to only be able to spawn in the water in the center, where they would eventually plummet to their death in lava. The game would detect that there was no longer an iron golem, and the process would repeat. One of the earliest designs I could find came from DocM77, where he showcased an early prototype for an iron farm inside a pre-release for 1.2. This design was a bit different, as the golems had to be pushed into the water instead of automatically spawning in it. This was a pre-release video, and obviously golems being able to spawn in water was changed a little bit after this video was released. A little bit later, and we eventually arrived at what might be considered the classic iron farm design. Villagers with doors on both sides and a water stream in the middle for their golems to spawn and die. This was basically the standard design for all these farms, with expanding them only requiring more doors and villagers for golems to spawn. When it came to finding tutorials for these farms, some of the best and most influential designs had to have come from Tango Tech. He basically had perfected the design to where it wasn't too complicated to build, but yet it yielded large quantities of iron for your world. These tutorials for the iron farms were by far the most popular ones, with them receiving millions of views. These tutorials remained functional in the current game for years, with 1.8 being the only update to affect these designs. It wasn't until the 1.14 Village and Pillage update where these farm designs became immediately obsolete and were rendered useless if you updated your world. As mentioned before, older versions of the game required there would be doors and villagers for an iron golem to spawn. Now, however, new village mechanics changed what was needed for an iron golem to be spawned. Villagers required not only villagers, but also beds and workstations to spawn a golem. Doors were no longer required for an area to be classified as a village, and now were only taking up space for old designs. The process of a golem spawning would also be sped up if a villager was frightened by a zombie trying to attack it, but we'll get to that in a second. As soon as the snapshots were released for this update, players quickly went to work with creating new compact and efficient designs to meet these specifications. It wasn't long after to where most farms that had been created by the community had reached a similar design. Basic versions of these farms now only require 3 villagers, as opposed to the many that were required before. With villagers needing to also be able to sleep, beds were put next to villagers, as well as a workstation to technically create a village. A similar spawning area was also common in these farms, where the golems could spawn and be harvested. Now, all of these features would technically be enough for golems to begin spawning. However, one of the most useful mechanics that was added to villages was the ability for a golem to quickly spawn if a zombie was attempting to kill a villager. Instead of having to wait for the iron golems to spawn randomly throughout the day, you can now force the waiting period and have a golem spawn up to every 45 seconds. This rapidly increased the drop rates of these farms, and these easy to build compact versions were now infinitely better than the old ones. Just as a reference to how efficient these new designs were, a basic iron farm before 1.14 would only produce about 32 iron ingots per hour. Now, basic iron farms for 1.14 would produce about 400 iron ingots per hour. With the 1.14 update, the amount of iron you could receive from these farms was now about 12 times more efficient than in previous versions. And that was actually only the baseline amount that you can get from these farms. You could easily double, triple, and quadruple the size of them to significantly increase the drop rates. The only other change that these village mechanics had was in 1.16, where workstations were actually no longer needed for a golem to spawn, which made these farms even easier to make. Now, I'm not going to dive too much into this topic, but heated debate began to arise over time whether or not these farms were too OP and ruined the enjoyment of the game. The opposing opinion of these farms is that it ruined how Minecraft should be played, and that manually harvesting these ores through mining was the intentional game design. However, my personal bias towards this was that the new features in the game require large amounts of iron to make it impossible to mine for. If the Mojang team had strong feelings against these farms, they would have been removed years ago. I feel that the intention is for more casual players to only play a single world for so long, and that they'll never need much iron to have a good experience with the game, and they would get more enjoyment out of mining and exploring for it. A player who's more dedicated to the game, like me, will probably progress much farther into their world and need this extra iron for features like beacons and hoppers, and that's where a farm that takes knowledge to build comes into play. But these opinions have already been discussed before, and they're easy to find if you want to hear more about the topic. Overall, iron farms are a crucial part of Minecraft that the community as a whole has come together to design over the years of updates. I find it fascinating that players are capable of figuring out how to manipulate these game mechanics and turn them into an efficient farm to collect large amounts of resources for their worlds. It's such a unique thing to see communities and channels dedicated to designing and sharing farms like these, and this is only one of the reasons why Minecraft is just such a unique game.